Christmas Star by Sherry Morris.
I wouldn't like to mention this,
Mrs. Henderson from next door said to my mom,
but your Christmas decorations are a bit too non-standard this year. I'm not sure the neighborhood appreciates it.
It was clear the nosy busybody did like mentioning it. Couldn't wait, in fact, and had most likely been sitting at the window for some time, twitching the curtains back and forth in anticipation of Mom's arrival. She hadn't even reached the house when Mrs. Henderson pounced. Non-standard, Mom said, and looked around the yard. There was a lot going on. 6 Santas, several sets of reindeer, rows of candy canes, armies of elves, circles of snowmen, plus 2 full-size inflatable snow globes containing waddling penguins. There was even a nativity set complete with wise men and camels, though we weren't particularly religious. It's what Jesus would do, my brother Kenny said. This was all his creation now that Dad had left us. There were also lots and lots of lights, hanging off the roof, hanging off the trees, wrapped around bushes and hedges, and outlining all the decorations. Some blinked, some zigged, some zagged, some moved in patterns, others spelled out words. All were synced to a timer and music. This was before you could just buy a program to do it. Kenny was a whiz with electronics and gadgets. He could have run the Pentagon from his bedroom like war games if he wanted to. But he just wanted to create light. As soon as we finished our Thanksgiving meal, Kenny would be out in the garage hauling boxes out. Everything was labeled and carefully stored. He'd grown his collection in a novel way since Mom refused to give him a lighting budget. Said it was costing her enough already in electricity. So he'd go around the neighborhood asking people if they had decorations they didn't want or lights that didn't work. The broken things he fixed, and the unwanted things he gave a home. I think he thought if there were enough lights, Dad would find his way back to us. Kenny was special like that. Most adults called him simple. Kids called him worse. So what if he would always live with Mom? They'd take care of each other.
Yes,
Mrs. Henderson said.
Your Christmas decorations are extremely non-standard, if you catch my drift,
pointing at the Santa next to the chimney. It was a little after 4 p.m. Our Christmas lights weren't on yet, but they would be, soon. From my upstairs window, I could see them both, my mom and Mrs. Henderson. I'd open the window a crack to better hear what they were saying, but I sorta already knew. I'd seen Kenny's lights. Mom sighed. She'd probably hoped to have a few minutes of peace before starting her evening cashier job at the gas station, when she'd already been on her feet all day working her Walmart job. And now she had Mrs. Henderson in front of her. No, Mom said, I don't catch your drift.
Maybe Kenny didn't understand when he was putting up the lights,
Mrs. Henderson said, stressing understand a little too much.
But other people do, including children. My grandkids were the ones who told me.
Told you what? Mom said.
The Santa standing on the roof with a trail of lights dangling down in front of him?
Yes.
When the lights are on, it looks like he's relieving himself on the nativity scene below.
Mom gave a short, sharp snort of surprise and shook her head. She looked closer and followed the trail of lights. There's a plug in the side of the house just behind the bushes. You can't see that from here, Mom explained. This is just one of those unfortunate coincidences that only certain people and their grandkids would notice. She narrowed her eyes and wouldn't look at Mrs. Henderson when she said it. Mom was hardly ever unpleasant to people, but with Mrs. Henderson and her grandkids, she made an exception.
What about the other Santa and the angel?
Mrs. Henderson asked. What about it? Mom asked in a tight voice. It's not a crime to have 2 Santas on one roof.
You're right, it isn't,
Mrs. Henderson said in a fake show of pleasant agreement.
But take a look at the angel. If you stand at a certain angle, it looks like the angel is, well...
Well, what?
interacting with Santa.
Interacting?
Yes, with Santa's lower area.
There was a pause. I wondered if Mrs. Henderson would actually say it. Mrs. Henderson, I'm in a bit of a hurry. If you have something to say...
When the lights are switched on, it looks like the angel is performing a sex act on Santa!
There was a silence while Mom took this in. Then she recovered herself and said, really, Mrs. Henderson, I don't think... But just then, the lights came on. And Mom didn't have to think. She could see. The lights were on a timer, and Mom had been too preoccupied and frazzled to notice Kenny's display. Until now.
Stand here,
Mrs. Henderson said. With the lights on, the angel's head moved back and forth, simulating the blowing of the trumpet. The trumpet's horn, in turn, moved back and forth, making it appear that Santa was receiving a blowjob. It seemed to be a good blowjob, because instead of saying, ho, 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 Santa was saying, oh, oh, oh. I see, Mom said, closing her eyes. She gathered herself and stomped into the house, leaving Mrs. Henderson on our front yard. Kenny got into a bunch of trouble. Though he said he didn't know what was going on, it seemed a bit like he did. It was hard to tell sometimes how much Kenny took in. Mom said he had a choice. He could put up standard Christmas displays, or he could take everything down. If anything else non-standard appeared, he'd have to get rid of everything, and not just put it back in boxes. She asked if he understood. Kenny said he did. She stood on tiptoe to kiss his forehead. Good, she said. Now I've got to go. As I watched Mom leave, I saw Mrs. Henderson's grandkids on the porch. They were giggling and poking each other. These identical twin boys had been menacing the town on visits ever since they'd been able to walk. They looked like angels with their blonde curls and cherub faces. No doubt Mrs. Henderson thought they shat halos. But they were annoying as tots and headed for serious trouble as they reached their teens. Family pets in the neighborhood went missing when they visited. Mr. Burns, who ran the Five and Dime, banned them from his store. Those twins are evil, he said. Somebody dubbed them the Tweevils, and the name stuck. No one could prove who dropped bricks off the bridge onto the highway, but somebody pointed out the Tweevils were in town when it happened. Everybody had something bad to say about the Tweevils, except Kenny. He had somehow befriended them, and I'd occasionally see them together. I couldn't help thinking that the Tweevils enjoyed having someone older at their service, while Kenny liked having kids as friends. It bothered me, but I didn't know what to do about it. Even though I was Kenny's younger sister, I was very protective of him. After Mom left, Kenny got the ladder out of the garage. He was muttering to himself when I checked on him. It's not fair, he said when he saw me. Yeah, I know, Kenny, I said. It's not fair. But it was funny. Then I winked. A small smile came across his face. We had a little laugh together. Kenny, I said, the Tweevils thought it was funny too, but you need to be careful. They won't get in trouble with Mom about your lights, but you will. Kenny nodded, but he wouldn't look at me. I decided to keep a closer eye on all three of them and asked a few friends to as well. Kenny's displays went back to standard and the Tweevils went back to their town. I hoped they'd visit their other grandma for Christmas. The first day of the school break, I planned a long lie-in. When our phone started ringing at 8 a.m., I ignored it. But Mom had already left for work and Kenny didn't answer phones. When it kept ringing at 5-minute intervals, I picked up. This better be good, I said. It was Karen, my best friend. It's Kenny's nativity scene, she said. It's gone very non-standard. How bad? I asked. I didn't see it, but my mom says it looks like Joseph and Mary found a babysitter for the night. Mary's not a virgin anymore. Oh, God, I groaned. That's what she said. I thanked Karen, hung up, and looked at the clock. People would be heading to work, but if anybody told Mom, we'd deny it. I knew there was really only one person to keep from seeing it. All was quiet at the Hendersons. I couldn't see any lights on. Old people slept late, I told myself, though I thought I saw movement at the curtains in one of the upstairs windows. When I got to the nativity scene, it was pretty much as Karen had said, though she hadn't mentioned everything. This was a life-size nativity set with each character made of molded plastic. Everyone was fully dressed, but it was pretty clear what was going on. Mary was being ravished by Joseph, the wise men were enjoying a threesome, and the camels were getting into the spirit as well. I moved it all back, but had a bad feeling. I couldn't find the baby Jesus. I saw Kenny watching me from the door. I tried to talk to him, but he locked himself in his room and wouldn't come out. When Mom came back, not a word was said. I was grateful she was always in a rush. While it's customary to rise early on Christmas morning, nobody expected to be wakened by screaming tweevils at 4 a.m. It was a double whammy of piercing yelps that brought us and neighbors from up and down the street over to find the cause of the commotion. Mrs. Henderson was one of the first on the scene to discover what the tweevils were up to. One had been plugging in the lights while the other moved the last of the plastic snowmen into place. They'd rearranged the circle, adjusting the snowman's hands to reach their neighbor's carrot, which they'd moved much lower down. The arranger must have signaled all was in place while still making a final adjustment to a snowman. The timing was perfect. Both were zapped while the other switched on the light to see the effect of their work. I knew I should have felt bad, but it was a real treat to see those tweevils with their surprised faces and singed fingers caught red-handed at the scene of the crime. Their hair stood on end, just like in cartoons. They were blinking and dazed, but not seriously hurt, just stung and confused. "Take your two non-standard angels home now," Mom said, pulling her bathrobe tight around her. "And don't let them come back." Mrs. Henderson slunk off with the tweevils, wrapping one arm around each of them as she guided them, sniffling and sniveling, back to her house. I looked at Kenny. He looked at me and winked. I gave the tiniest nod of acknowledgement and smiled. Sometimes, Kenny was as bright as his lights. In the distance, movement caught my eye. It was too dark to see clearly. It passed under a streetlight. In its mouth, a dog was carrying the plastic baby Jesus. Then it was whisked out of the light, never to be seen again.